Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello everybody, Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, coming at you live from the shores of the Brazos River right here at Lusk Landing outside of Granbury, Texas. Let's talk about ponds and lakes and stuff. You guys hop in, join in, let's do a little bit of talking and get some questions. I'm glad to see we have 0 viewers. I didn't really put the word out. I mean, I knew I was going to broadcast, but kind of been tied up. So, oh, good, we have 2 viewers. Thank goodness, we're not going to get skunked tonight. You guys pop in, let me know who's watching and what you guys want to talk about. Really would love to hear your questions, and we'll talk about ponds and lakes. You know, last week I talked a little bit about niches, but I never did really get into that very deeply. So I thought I'd start talking about that. One of my favorite things about ponds and lakes is there's more than one dimension. There's like 3 or 4 dimensions. So we've got here, there, up and down, and then what goes on above the waterline. Hello, John Dyer. Good to see you. Danny Mack checking in from San Antonio. John's checking in from the Carolinas. So you guys throw some questions at me, but before you do, I want to talk about different niches. When we start thinking about pond management, and let's just take John Dyer, and we'll take Danny Mack, for example. John Dyer, he's got his pond over there in the Atlantic seaboard, and when he first bought the place, the pond had been neglected. And people, a lot of folks don't really realize that you can manage a pond. Who knew? So John started kind of figuring that out, and he began to start seeing that all these different things kind of come into play. And one of the things that we talked about, John and Danny Mack have both been to the Institute of Higher Pondology, which if you haven't done that, you need to think about doing that if you're really serious about managing a pond or a lake. So what John started figuring out is all these different niches within his pond need to be filled with something. So he went in and pulled out a bunch of trees and pulled out a bunch of junk out of the pond. Then after he did that and he started learning more about it, he thought, you know what, I actually removed some habitat. So when you start looking at niches, different animals and different plants require their niche. So for example, let's just take bluegills. Bluegills live in the littoral zone, which is the shallow water above the thermocline where the majority of the productivity of a pond occurs. So that's where the plants grow. The underwater submerged plants and the different kinds of you got the detritus on the bottom that fertilize the plants, and the plants grow up and they become a habitat for something. Hello, Jim Allen. He's checking in from Kentucky. He's been to the Institute of Higher Pondology. Deborah Corlew, good to see you. Dave Weber checking in from northwest Kansas. I think you're in northwest Kansas, dude. Don't you know where you live? Come on, work it out with me, dude. Come on, Dave Weber, northwest Kansas. No, wait. Northeast Kansas? Yeah, I guess it is northeast Kansas because it's northwest Missouri. Well, all right. Count me wrong. I hate starting out being wrong. But anyway, Dave Weber. A thinker of things big and small. That's Dave Weber. Dave Weber likes to think about cool stuff. Kyle Collins Meyer, checking in from southwest Iowa. Ron Krisman, the smallmouth guy. Jeremy Day checking in from Harris County or Montgomery County, Texas, down around Houston. So anyway, where was I? Oh, niches. So, like for example, threadfin shad love open water. They're filter feeders. But gizzard shad, they feed on the bottom in shallow water. Largemouth bass, they're ambush predators, so they like to be in shallow water with quick access to deep water most of the time. Channel catfish, different fish altogether. So where I'm going is the point I want to make is there are different niches inside your pond, and one of the fun things is to kind of start figuring out what those niches are and how can you do that? How can you utilize those? Josh Milszewski. Josh, he's one of my Pond Boss moderators, and I found out after umpteen years that I can't pronounce his last name. And John, you're going to get a big chuckle. Josh, you're going to get a big chuckle out of the next issue of Pond Boss. Check in, look at, read Ask the Boss in the upcoming issue. Now, I have a confession. I was late. I tried to get it done on schedule, but then the holidays got in the way. And I have a really hard time saying no to my wife. Now, if you guys would like to get a little bit of insight into my wife, Debbie, who is an absolute doll, she makes me laugh a lot. Go to my Bob Lusk Facebook page after the show and look at the video that I shot of her. It's already had 2,100 views for with a guy like me. That's a lot, in this venue, in this social media thing. And you will laugh your butt off, I promise. It's pretty funny because I kind of cornered her and she hates it. She does not like quizzes. So, Josh Milszewski. Did I get it right? Just say yes. I'm trying, really. I'm trying hard. All right, so anyway, where was I? Niches. So, one of the things incumbent, I like that word incumbent. I spent 3 hours watching the Senate grill Pete Ismuth today, which I thought was pretty interesting how they do that process. I don't pay attention to it much. Niches. Figure out the different niches within your pond, and there's something that will live in each one of those niches. And I tell you something else. One of the most cool things, I figured this out at Richmond Mill Lake in North Carolina, near Laurel Hill, outside of Laurinburg, North Carolina. Probably almost 20 years ago. The things that we did below the surface of that water had a dramatic impact at what happened at the waterline and above. And here's what I mean by that. We started figuring out that lake was so low on nutrient load, and it had to be that way. That water over there is acidic. It's tannic. They call it black water. The water looks like iced tea. You get a glass of it, and it's not quite as dark as this wine, but it looks just like iced tea. Cheers. And so we figured out with a flow rate between 4,000 and 8,000 gallons per minute flowing over the Milszewski. Dude, just call me. You got my number, don't you? Dude, we got to do this. I like with Ron Ardoin, it's spelled Ardouin. And I called him Ardoin. I ain't doing it. It's Ardoin. Dude, it's Cajun. I don't know how to. I'm like from Texas. I'm not the smartest book in the library or the sharpest tack on the pen box. Yeah, Josh, call me. We got to get this figured out because it's driving me absolutely nuts. And I see questions, so I need to kind of get onto that. So, anyway, niches. So what I started seeing at Richmond Mill Lake, I knew that with that kind of flow rate, the lake turned over at least every 2 weeks based on rainfall. Sometimes it would turn over in 3 or 4 days. Well, they had this big U-shaped concrete spillway, and water constantly pours over that lake. There's no chance we could lime it, no chance we could fertilize it. So what we did was we made the conscious decision that we were going to prop that lake up with fish food. So we put 50 feeders on a 125-acre lake back in the day, and we fed the fish for about 10 years. There were some phenomenal things that happened with that lake. Well, there were consequences. We started noticing, for example, all the feeders were placed on all but 10. We had 10 shaker feeders, vibratory feeders that we put over bluegill spawning areas, over sandy areas. The other feeders sat on platforms out in the lake. Well, they couldn't flood, so we bought a pontoon boat and put this gadget on the front where we could just go right up to the platform of the feeders, take the lid off, and we had a bulkhead where we could put 2 pallets of feed on this pontoon boat. Then we could drive around the lake filling up the feeders. Now I got to do that a few times, but they had people there, Dave Bueller and his guys, his right hand people. And they would go fill the feeders up from the lake. Well, we started noticing that some of the feeders went empty faster than the others. Well, so we thought we had a problem because we had that feeding system on a Wi-Fi program back then, 2006, 7, 8, through there, 5, 6, 7, through there somewhere. And, man, I'm looking at your questions. I'm going to have to ignore that just for a minute so I can stay on point. Well, we started seeing some of the feeders were getting empty too fast, so we thought maybe that we had the timers off. We had them on a Wi-Fi system where we could go on a laptop computer and set each feeder to a certain time frame to go off. Well, we started figuring out that there was nothing wrong with the timers, but something else was going on. We had like, I think it was 25 scatter feeders and 15 directional feeders and 10 vibratory feeders. Well, what we found out was that raccoons, we set up some cameras, some game cameras, raccoons would swim out in the water, climb up on the platform, spin the spinner under the scatter feeders and eat the fish food. So one of the caretakers at the property started setting some traps and trapped 98 raccoons in 2 weeks. 98 raccoons. Can you believe that? Well, then we also noticed that there was this before the lake, so the lake was drained, renovated, refilled, and we had to go in at dusk or get carried away by mosquitoes. Well, after about 6 or 8 months, we started noticing we could stay out after dusk. The mosquitoes weren't so bad. So we started looking, and one of the benefits of the rehab of the lake was we started seeing tens of thousands of dragonflies. Guess what they eat? Mosquitoes. And then we started seeing more songbirds, and then all of a sudden here comes some ospreys and birds of prey, and then bald eagles showed up. So we started figuring out that what we were doing at and below the waterline had an impact above the waterline. So I'm going to tell you guys that the things that you do with the different niches of your pond is going to impact your pond, and this is going to impact what happens above the waterline. One of my favorite stories was about Mike Mitchell, who's a fisheries biologist who's retired now from Colorado, moved to Florida. But one of his gigs in Colorado for his 30-plus years was renovating trout streams on private property. So he would renovate a trout stream, and it was really expensive to do that because you had to go through a heavy-duty permitting process. And then the way that you did these trout streams was pretty tedious because you had to think about the fluid dynamics and the hydraulics of the water and snow melt and the way the water would flow during peak times. So he renovated part of a river going through this ranch. And you can actually read about this in the next issue of Pond Boss, although I don't name him. He's played a role in it. And he got a call one Sunday morning. He was getting ready to go to church. He got a call from this wealthy landowner that this guy just got through spending 7 figures renovating a trout stream. And he called him and says, "Hey, Mike, listen, I just watched a bald eagle grab about a 5-pound trout, couldn't lift it, so it backed up, drug it out on the shore, and now it's eating it." And Mike tells the story. He says, I kind of bristled, the hair on my neck stood up, and I was really worried about what he was going to say because I didn't have an answer for that. And what he said to Mike, he said, it just floored me. He says, "Mike, I've been coming to this ranch since I was a little boy. And when I was a little boy, I remember seeing bald eagles nesting here, and then they disappeared. They were gone." He said, "Now, this eagle that's eating this trout, as I'm talking to you, was hatched in a nest on our ranch, and I've watched it fledge. Can you get me some more trout?" So when you start thinking about the different angles of the way things happen above the waterline, there's some things you guys can do to make some cool things happen, not only below the waterline, but above the waterline. So there you go, Milszewski. There's Fred Bingaman, one of my favorite people on the planet, from St. Louis, Missouri. All right, let's see here. Okay, so Josh, you're in Nebraska right now. That's cool. How's your nephew? I've written about him. Dave Weber, 14 degrees here today at 5 p.m., 6 inches of ice on his ponds and 16 inches of snow. First time I ever seen this. Had a gobbler strutting next to a hen in the middle of my 1-acre pond just below my house. So, how many of you have turkeys strolling across your pond? Dave Weber does. So, one of the things, let's talk about that for a minute. Let's hit that 14 degrees. And I got a call from one of my favorite people as well, one of my clients that's near Drexel, Missouri, from via Kansas City, south of there. his lake is frozen over for the first time. The ice is not thick enough to get on. 6 inches is pretty dadgum close to where you can get out on it and go ice fishing. But the thing about it is when you get 6 inches of ice and 16 inches of snow, when that pond iced up, and let's see, here we are, I guess that had to have happened in December when your ice showed up. Then you got the snow. One thing you got to be careful of is, and there's not if you got a snow blower and you're comfortable getting on that ice, I'd sure see if I could blow some of that snow off the pond, off the ice, just so you can get a little sunlight penetrating through the ice. Don't do it if it's not safe. And of course, here's a guy in Texas. The only time I ever see ice is in a glass of tea. So it's early enough that if it stays that way until March, you run a risk of some winter kill issues. Jason Dodd checking in from South Central Kansas, outside of Wichita. Hello, Wayne. Golly, good gosh, Wayne. Hey, I'm going to call you tomorrow, Wayne. I got something cooking that I think you would totally enjoy. Wayne Lancaster totally would. I got something I'm working on, dude, and this is something you need to have some fun. I need to get your happy ass out of the house a little bit and hang out with me because I got something really, really cool. Mike Cottrell, Palo Pinto County, Texas, ready for the next cold front. Well, we got one coming Saturday. Danny Mack, would the fish breeders have some larger fish these days? F1s, hybrid stripers, trout. Some of them do, but here's the way that works. If they've got some breeding fish, they're going to wait until they breed them, then they'll sell them. So they're probably not going to do it right now. Hello, Steve Sharp. Good to see you. Okay, Milshewski, Josh, help me out, dog. Hey, Fred, thanks for doing that. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like, share this video to your timeline, and you're eligible for a drawing. And I talked to Leanne today, and I forgot to tell her to do the drawing, but we're going to do that. Okay, Dave Weber, how about a conversation about IRS rules and farm tax deduction on the new pond I had built this past year? Did I really build a pond? I do have a lot of bulldozer anti-soil erosion conservation work performed. You know what, Dave? I'm starting to learn about some things like that. That's actually a question for a CPA rather than the pond boss. But my son Jonathan, I hung up with him at 6:15. He is working on some things like that about some IRS rules and farm tax deductions based on soil productivity, based on soil fertility. Maybe not so much about building lakes and ponds, but I know this. You should be able to deduct a pond that you had built simply because it's a farm expense to be able to provide stock water for your animals, or for wildlife. But that, I'm going to stay in my lane on that. I don't have a really, really good answer, but I know this, that if you had some assistance to build it, you're going to get a 1099 from whatever federal agency threw some money at it. And so you need to be able to deduct something. So I don't know the answer to that, but here's a toast from Pecan Plantation right there. Josh Dude, you gotta call me. My phone's right here. Let me see if I got your phone number. Hey, y'all, wait a minute. I'm gonna look and see if I have Josh's. I should have Josh. Oh, I do. I'm gonna call him right now. Y'all bear with me here. Any advice on catching elusive trout recently stocked? Pond is 1 acre and stocked 85. Okay, dude, tell me how you say your name. How do we do this? Yeah, I'm here. Talk to me.
Here we go. Milchusky.
Milchusky! Dude, Josh Milchusky. All right, I got it. Milchusky.
Don't feel bad. Nobody gets it, right?
I don't feel bad about anything. I'm just so glad to talk to you live right here on Facebook. Milchusky. Milczewski. Milchusky. All right, I will never screw it up again, or maybe I will. All right, I'm going to stay live. See, you got to go. Bye. Josh Milchusky. I hope that made you laugh. Any advice on catching elusive trout recently stocked? Pond is 1 acre and stocked 85, 3 species, some advanced sizes, large population of eater size. Iced over now, trying to get my nephew on them. Can't figure them out. You know, the pond being iced over is probably the first issue. If you've, Josh oh crap, already forgot. I mean, call it now. Milchusky. Trying to get my nephew on. Now, you know that those trout that you stock, they've been fed fish food. They've been fed a fish meal-based fish food. So my first suggestion is if you have a live scope, or everybody that ice fishes has a camera. So find them. You got to drill a hole and figure out where they are, because odds are high in a 1 acre pond that they're probably going to be fairly well schooled up. And you shouldn't have to drill more than 3 or 4 holes in that ice to find them. And once you find them, then I would come up with some kind of a concoction. Of course, you know, when they're being raised, they're raised in because they come out of Missouri, almost every one of them, where you are anyway. I would start looking at the different kind of fish foods that, I mean, if you got some like Aquamax MVP, moisten some of it, turn it into a dough bait, add a scent to it, and I would use that on a treble hook. And then once you finally start finding them, they ought to be able to hit like little silver spoons. So if you've got some eater-sized golden shiners, use like a rooster tail or something silver. Try that, see what goes on, what happens there. Steve Sharf, I have a question about cormorants and checking fish populations after they've had their way with the first year fish. Ouch, we don't want that. Okay, Steve, you have a question about cormorants and checking fish populations after they've had their way. Woo, the first year fish. You know, I can't sit here and tell you to shoot a cormorant. I don't want that responsibility, because they're protected. If you could assist in their suicide, or figure out a way for them to run away, leave. Milchusky. Yeah, I think I got it. Is that right? Milchusky? What do you look for? Well, I tell you, one of the first telltale signs is the fish they didn't eat. So if you had a flock of cormorants come onto your pond and they didn't eat all your fish, the fish that are left are going to have scars. They're going to have V-shaped scars on their back where a cormorant tried to eat them and was not able to do that. Jeremy Day got 4 wood duck boxes up. Yep, any day I... Okay, woo, hold up. Let's get running away from me here. Milchusky. Hello, Kenny Sanderson. Okay, Jeremy Day got 4 wood duck boxes up. Anything I can do food-wise for the new baby ducks? No, there's nothing you can do food-wise. Because what will happen is when you get the wood duck boxes up, oh, dang, my nose is itching. That means somebody's coming to see me. If their doorbell rings, I'm going to ignore it. Here's the way that works. I've done this. It's really, really fun. When you get the wood duck boxes up, did you know you can buy a camera and put in those wood duck boxes? If you've got access to the internet, which at your place you probably don't. But you can stream those cameras. You can buy some live cameras so you can actually watch what goes on in those wood duck boxes. And I'll tell you what I've seen before. Bob and Donna McFarland, they're the wood duck magnates that I know in East Texas. And I have not been able to be in a position where I could have cameras in a wood duck box, but they have, and I've seen their videos. It's amazing because everything happens from more than one hen laying eggs in a box to 2 hens getting in a bar fight trying to whip each other's asses over who's going to sit on the eggs. You know, and then the males kind of stand back watching, how's this going to work out? You know, but what happens is once that hen lays her 20 eggs or whatever she lays, then she's going to sit. And when it comes hatch day, when she sits, I think is it 21 days until they hatch. So when they hatch, there's a little ladder inside that wood duck box where the little woodies can climb up and jump out the hole, which she makes them do that. And then they climb up, jump out the hole, then they go jump in the water, and then within just an hour, she has them hidden. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen wood ducks, hatchlings, come out of our wood duck boxes, which I've seen that back at LL2, Lusk Lodge, 2. We had 8 wood duck boxes up on 8 ponds, and I've seen a number of wood duck hatches, because you got to know when she's sitting so you can be there for hatch day. And when they hatch and they come out, she's going to take them, and then she's going to hide them. And I don't care how big your pond is, she's really good at that. And it's her job to feed them. So there's really not much you can do to feed those baby wood ducks. Yeah, so Danny Mac has heard some horror stories about 1099s. Here's the inches. Here's the inches. I'm looking at Jim Nordquist, 3 inches of ice. Kenny Sanderson. You guys are so fun. So fun. I've heard some 1099 horror stories. So here's the way that works. So when you get federal assistance to build a pond, the NRCS or somebody with the USDA is going to engineer that pond, and it's got to be built to those engineering specs. Well, in my opinion, I'm in my 46th year of doing this. Here's my opinion. In my opinion, a lot of these ponds are overbuilt because there's nobody working for the federal government that wants to assume the risk of a dam failing. So what happens is they will pay for conservation and erosion control, whatever's available in your county through the USDA. They will pay their percentage. Then you get a 1099, which means you're paying federal income tax on that. And I think what Danny Mac's talking about is some of the horror stories is when you get a 1099 for work that the federal government paid for that was overkill, where they spent more money to build the pond than what you might have had you worked with a private engineer or with that dirt guy to do it. Oh my gosh, I just scrolled past this question. Oh, Jeremy, dude, you've laid yourself wide open, and I'm gonna have a little dignity, integrity, and not gonna do it here. How can you tell if you have beavers or nutrias? Saw something swimming the other night, and I've seen trees chewed on by the creek about 100 yards away. Also, what are the odds of alligators swimming up the creek and getting in the pond eventually? Well, Jeremy, here's where you left yourself wide open. How can you tell if you have beavers or nutria? Please forgive me. Beavers have flat tails. Nutrias look like rats, giant rats. Okay, so if you saw something swimming the other night, and if you've got trees chewed on, nutria don't do that. Beavers do that. So beavers, I've seen beavers girdle oak trees, 10-inch oak trees. The young beavers are too stupid to know not to eat an oak tree. The older beavers know better, So if you've got trees that are being chewed on, that's beavers. So you've got a couple of choices. Now, I tell you what, where Josh Milchewski lives, did I get that right? In Colorado, beavers are welcome because they actually provide a service by damming up creeks and impounding water. I went to, where the hell did I go? We took a family vacation to Breckenridge, Colorado, and we did this, did the ski lift up the mountain, and it goes over a whole bunch of little beaver holes in a creek, and it's fascinating how much it helps that. But down around Montgomery, Texas, or Navasota, Texas, that's not what you want. You really don't want the beavers chewing down your trees. So what do you do about it? Well, the immediate thing unless you can figure out how to trap the beavers using Conibear 330s, and be careful with those. Those are a little tricky. You can break your arm or something, leg, something. Be real careful with that. Be sure you know what you're doing. That's where I'm going to go. If you've got beavers and they're eating trees you don't want, you either put chicken wire around the trees taller than a beaver can stand, or you're going to trap the beavers. What are the odds of alligators swimming up the creek? The odds of alligators swimming up the creek in Montgomery County or Harris County, Texas, pretty good. I mean, alligators live there. The odds of I don't know. What are the odds? 20%. I'm guessing. But you do have odds of seeing alligators from time to time. Without getting too crazy with height, how would you suggest hanging bat houses? Prefer them up. You know what? Bat houses, I've hung bat houses need to be in an area where it gets really hot. The bat house needs to have direct sunlight, and there's instructions on how to do that. But typically people put them on poles or under the eaves of a barn with direct sunlight all day long, because they've got to have heat. Yeah, I'd hang them in a tree with direct sunlight that face, where the bat house faces south. And if you've got bats, they may. Hello, Joel Danauer, Louisiana man, Little Lake. That's all right. Wow, they are this far south. What? Alligators? Alligators are that far south. Beavers? Yeah, beavers are everywhere. Here's a little beaver story. When I first started in business, I leased a fish farm in 1980, January of 1980. Never saw a beaver. But I tell you what I did see. I saw a lot of beaver cowboy hats. Saw some beaver furs. Because the trapping industry was thriving back then, I didn't see any beavers. That was very rare to see a beaver. And then when the animal rights activists threw red paint on furs at some Grammy deal or some freaking award ceremony, that changed the paradigm. And probably by about 1983 or 84, I saw my very first beaver. It was a roadkill on Highway 287 near Esteline, Texas, where the bridge goes across the Red River. And I was hauling some fish to stock some lakes up in the Panhandle at Cal Farley's Boys Ranch, of all places. A benefactor, the Corson Oil Company, Kirk Corson and his dad, I think his name is Perry Corson. No, from Perryton, Texas. They bought a bunch of fish to stock ponds for the orphanage, the Cal Farley's Boys Ranch. And I was clicking along Highway 287. I left my fish farm like at 2 in the morning because I had to be up there at 9 in the morning. And I'm clicking along and I see something laying dead right at daylight. And I'm driving, I look at it. I look like a beaver. And I'd never seen a beaver. Go figure. So I found the next U-turn, turned around, went back and looked, and sure enough, there's a dead beaver. That's the first beaver I saw. That was like in 1983, 82 or 83, somewhere like that. Well, then later on, yeah, beavers are that far south. Beavers are actually, Jeremy, everywhere. They're all over the place. I see them now. I see beavers from West Texas, Northwest Texas, all the way to the eastern seaboard. They're everywhere. I see in your part of the planet, there's a pretty fair number of nutria. I don't know if you guys know the story about nutria or not. Hey, let's take a minute and do a commercial. Palmos Magazine, $35 a year. Say it with me now. Cheaper than a Friday night date, and it lasts a year. And I promise you, this magazine is full of nuggets. That's one of my favorite little phrases. One of the Palmos subscribers years ago sent a note and said, "Bob, I don't get stuff out of every article, but I get nuggets out of every magazine." $35 a year. Hey, Purina Mills, still love those guys. Game Fish Chow, Aquamax. They have a great lineup of products. I firmly believe in them. Texas Hunter products. Not only do I love what Texas Hunter does, I love how they do it. I love the fact that when you call them, they'll talk to you. You can get a human. You can actually call Texas Hunter products and get a human on the phone. So not only do they have great fish feeders, they've got wildlife feeders. They now have dog feeders. Chris Blood called me the other day. I mean, there's a piece in Ask the Boss in the latest issue where I talk about that dog feeder. They've got fish habitat. It's a little pricey, but for the value, it's there. So check out Texas Hunter. Bird Dog. Check out birddogit.com. Now, that's my son, Jonathan's company. And I am so glad I'm his dad. And I'm so glad I get to stand on the sidelines watching him be the success that he is. He hung out with Ted Nugent today. He got to meet Ted Nugent, went to lunch with him, had breakfast with him, went to lunch with him. He's spending time with Ted Nugent. How cool is that? You know, Ted did an opening at the state legislature at the Capitol in Austin today, and he played, if you've never heard his rendition of the Star Spangled Banner on his guitar, it's pretty freaking epic. So Jonathan Lusk, birddogit.com, check it out. And he's figuring out, going back to Dave Weber's question, he's figuring out some stuff about income, IRS deductions and some of the federal programs. I don't quite get all that, but he does. So he can hammer down and help you on that. David Schneiderman, Easy Docks of Texas. He's a sponsor of this show too. He sent me a knife. I use it every day. His sponsorship is a kitchen knife, and advertises in Pond Boss. Might I add? Yep, beavers. Yep. Okay, Jim Nordquist, let's see what you got cooking here, buddy. I get my little scrolling machine here to work. All right, let me see here. Okay, something's happening. Y'all bear with me. Milchewski. A couple of weeks ago, I spotted a muskrat munching on a fish. Yep, they'll do that. Muskrats, typically, we don't see those in Texas. Besides being hard on dams and on ponds, are they a problem? They can be a problem for fish populations. So, one or two muskrats is not going to bother a fish population, but you get the little muskrat mounds where where they build their lodges and they begin to reproduce. They can have an effect on a fish population. So that's more of a function of numbers. Where river otters, for example, a pair of river otters typically run in pairs, mommy, daddy, and if they have any little baby animals, they'll run around and they'll catch, like this time. This is the time of year they're going to catch your biggest fish, play with them for a little bit, chew their guts out, and then leave the carcass on your dock. So one of the saving graces for like Dave Weber is this pond's frozen over, so they can't get in there and do that. Jeremy Day, I read where people swear that crawfish can burrow into your dam, causing issues. Yeah, well, I tell you this. It takes so long for crawfish to cause issues with dams that you should see it coming before it happens. So think about it like this: when a pond is built and the clay is compacted properly, what does a crawfish have to go through to burrow through that compacted clay? And then what typically happens with crawfish is that female crawfish will burrow down to get to the water, and that's where she's going to stay until her eggs hatch. Now she goes down in there with eggs, and when she comes out, her eggs have hatched. They're clinging to her tail, and she releases them. So it's not like it's a community effort for crawfish to start building tunnels and like with nutria, for example, muskrats, and to some degree beavers, they'll be digging holes with tunnels, and we'll have this inner underground working of kind of like what Hamas has done in Israel. Little pregnant pause there to soak that in. I'm comparing Hamas to nutria and beavers. Woo, okay. All right, Jim Norquist, adult woodies like fish food. I didn't know that. I have not. We fed our fish all the time, and we had wood ducks. We had one wood duck box on each pond, and actually two of the wood duck boxes had barn owls, which was so much fun to watch. But the other ones would have wood ducks. But I don't know that I've ever seen wood ducks go eat fish food. I think that's kind of cool. Kyle R. Collins Myers saw a muskrat swimming under the ice last weekend. What's the best way to deal with or catch them when the pond is iced over? Question from Virgil. Oh, Virgil! Okay, Virgil. Well, so when the pond is iced over and they're under the ice, they got to know how to get in and out. They're not going to have more than one or two places. So figure out what their habits are. If you see a muskrat under the ice there, Virgil, then there's got to be a slide where they're coming in and getting under the ice. They're not going to go just dig a hole in the ice. They're going to go under the ice at the edge. So figure out where they're going in, and it won't be more than two or three places. Once you find that, then you can set a trap and catch them when they're coming out, because they cannot hold their breath under that ice very long. Can you post your boys' web? Yeah, let me tell you what it is. It's birddogit.com. Check that out. And so what Jonathan did about 3 years ago, he called me one day and he said, "Hey, Dad," and Jonathan was, 40 at that time. And he's like everybody 40. Wife, small kids, they're growing up, spends every waking hour feeding people, getting them in bed on time, getting them through school, activities, all that. Doesn't have time to go hunt. So Jonathan says, "Dad, I'd love to be able to take my kids hunting when they get a little bigger, but I don't want to deal with a lease. I don't have time for a lease. And if I work with an outfitter, we got to plan that out, got to plan it out so far." He says, so then the other choice, like in Texas, all the land is privately owned. So I got to have a friend that will invite me. But, what are the chances? And we really need to get more people hunting. And I said, dude, I think yeah, you're right. He said, well, I've got an idea. What if we create a company that's kind of like the Airbnb or VRBO of hunting, where I work with ranchers and landowners that have excess, they have some animals that need to be harvested, and then put them with qualified, vetted hunters and create and curate that experience. I said, dude, that's a great idea. So he created Bird Dog. That's the name of the company. The website is birddogit.com. And so it's actually, and the way it works out, let's say that you invite some friends over tonight, and you guys are chit-chatting, and you say, you know what, we ought to go hunt hogs from a helicopter. How in the hell do you do that? Well, you go to birddogit.com, and for $2,500 per hunter, and you can negotiate a better deal if you can, you're going to go climb a helicopter and shoot hogs somewhere in Texas. So there's all kinds. Barred owl or Bruce. Barred. B-A-R-R-E-D, owl. I love Bruce Condello. There it is. Josh put it up. So glad to see Bruce. Dude, hey man, I got some stuff going on. We need to talk one of these days. Call me when you got time. Just got through talking to Josh Milchewski. Yep. Eric, talk about these diving ducks and any negative effects on my pond. They're called water turkeys. Woo! Water turkeys are cormorants, which is what Jeremy Day said, except he didn't spell it right, but we're going to give him a little grace and mercy because cormorants are water turkeys. So there are diving ducks, but a water turkey, cormorant's not really a duck. It's a cormorant. They got a hooked beak. There's anhingas that have a straight beak. They're diving. And those things will actually go under the water and herd fish. I've watched them. It's pretty amazing. I watched, here's a little story. I served a sentence in southeast Texas working for a fish farm back for about 3 or 4 months. And then leased space from them like in 1983. It was working for that guy was not fun, but I learned a lot. So they had this was down south of Houston, and they had these rice reservoirs. And I remember cormorants were pretty low in numbers. They had reached close to extinction. There was like less than 20,000 of them in the 70s. Well, then the federal government outlawed DDT, and the way DDT worked is farmers would use it as a pesticide, and it would end up in water, and fish would consume it or would get in the skin of fish, and the cormorants would eat the fish. And the only way that the cormorants could get rid of the DDT was through their eggs. Well, DDT in the egg of a cormorant made the eggs pliable and soft. They couldn't hatch. So the cormorant numbers plummeted. So when the federal government outlawed DDT in the 70s, then the numbers of cormorants started to go up. Well, by about 1982, 83, when I was down in South Texas, their numbers had escalated to the point that they were becoming a nuisance. So I drive my pickup up on this levee of about a 20-acre rice reservoir, which was a bass lake on this fish farm, and I saw this bird dive, and I'd seen a few of them. I didn't know what they were. Well, it dove, and when it came back up, it had this bass in its mouth sideways. It flipped its head, flipped that fish, turned it long way, swallowed it head first. Well, I knew there was no chance that bird could fly because it had just at least doubled its weight. So I hooked it back to my house. I got my 20-gauge shotgun. I'm admitting breaking the law. And I went back to that pond. And I saw that bird. It was the only bird there. And I couldn't get close enough to shoot it. And it took about 30 minutes to get close enough to shoot it. I finally shot it. It was like 30 yards offshore, and the wind was kind of low that day. It took another hour for it to float close enough to the shore that I could get it. So about an hour and a half after it swallowed that bass, I was able to wade out in the water far enough where I could get it and bring it up, and I dropped the tailgate on my pickup, pulled my pocket knife out, and I cut the belly of that cormorant open, and that bass fell out, and it was covered in writhing little bitty round worms. I reeled back. I didn't know that was going to happen. And that's when I learned about cormorants. They've got roundworms in their gut, and that's what does the work to digest the fish. And within that hour and a half, the eyes were gone, the scales were falling off, and those worms were just digging into that fish. Well, I weighed it and I measured it. That fish was 15 inches long and it weighed 1 pound 7 ounces. And that bird had swallowed that fish. At that point, it got my attention. So I've seen some lakes where the bass are overcrowded, where the cormorants actually helped by thinning out the numbers of the birds. I mean, the numbers of the fish. But I'm going to tell you, overall, for a well-managed lake, they're a detriment. I wouldn't want them. So there's my little spin on cormorants. Bruce Condello, dude, we need to talk one of these days. I'm missing you. All right, Virgil. Mark Dyer, one of our HOA lake residents, believes my single feeder is the cause of our blue-green algae bloom. Well, that's another misinformed human. I got a call from a guy yesterday. Actually, I wrote about this in the next issue of Pond Boss, which will be in your mailbox here in a couple of days because I was late. I got a call from a guy yesterday who's got the biggest blue-green algae bloom I've ever seen this time of year. Visibility is about 7 or 8 inches. I had him send a sample of the water to Bill Cody, who identified it as a harmful algae bloom, which basically means that 99% of the algae in that lake is blue-greens. Well, what we didn't know is it was a species that carries toxins that can kill anything from deer and cattle to fish. So I had him take another sample, preserve it, and send it to a lab in Washington State. And the results came back that species of algae was one of the ones that carried the toxins, but it wasn't carrying these toxins. So his question to me was, they bought some bluegill from a vendor. Could the water from the fish transport tank be what sparked the algae bloom? Absolutely not. What happened in that lake and most lakes that have a blue-green algae bloom is everything lines up for that blue-green algae, which is a bacteria, by the way, to be able to thrive and grow and manifest itself. This time of year is not typically when it happens. It typically happens in the summertime when the blue-greens can outcompete all the good algae. But it's happening now because the blue-greens can outcompete the good algae because the good algae goes dormant when the water temperature gets into the 50s. So your feeder has absolutely nothing to do with creating a blue-green algae bloom. That guy's barking up the wrong algae tree. I've been informally requested to not feed for a year to prove the blue-green algae will still bloom with me not feeding. As a board member in the face of our management plan, do I in good faith? No, don't stop feeding. Keep feeding a good feed. He's wrong. Ask him to prove it. Prove it. And what you're going to find out is that there's an imbalance between nitrogen and phosphorus in that lake, Mark. And because of that imbalance, that's what allows blue-green algae to bloom. And it's more likely that his high nitrogen fertilizer in his lawn is triggering part of that bloom than it is the fish food that you're feeding. You know, and I'm pointing my finger. He's more likely to be the problem because he's fertilizing his yard. That's a bigger trigger than any fish food that you're going to feed. You don't need to provide any documentation from any manufacturer. He needs to provide documentation that proves that what you're doing is wrong. I'm a little bit passionate about that. I'm real passionate. You know, I took a personality test a few times, and one of my personality flaws is, and I don't know what to do about it. I hate stupid. I hate it. And it's everything I can do to maintain my integrity and dignity when something stupid is said. That was stupid. That neighbor said something stupid, arrogant, and wrong. Fish food does not trigger a blue-green algae bloom. It's way more complicated than that, and it's a higher likelihood that people fertilizing their lawns improperly could trigger that blue-green algae bloom. So, Grandpa called them cigar butts. I have never heard a water turkey called cigar butts. That's new. Eric Collerman. Hey, Eric, I quoted you in the next issue of Pond Boss. If you're not a subscriber, you need to do it so you can defend yourself. You asked a question on here. I was a little short on my Ask the Boss questions and answers, so I went on here and gathered up some of the... I'm going to pour a little bit more wine because I'm almost done. Because it is 7:22, and I got to go eat a salad in a minute. So I do have a question that you asked in the upcoming issue of Pond Boss. What I see in my pond not so have curved beaks. Okay. What I see in my pond does not have curved beaks. Those are probably, look up anhinga. Anhuinga. Hey, I think it's the one the spelling bee. However, they constantly dive under the water doing whatever they're doing. Just want they are good or bad. Well, if you don't mind them eating your fish, then they're good. If you don't want them to eat your fish, not so good. Mark Dyer watched a video of cormorant on a live scope, forward-facing sonar, diving down over 10 feet deep to catch a fish. Okay, dude, I got to tell you this story, Mark. This is amazing. You know, back in the 80s, when I really started learning about cormorants, I was fascinated. And there was, I remember a story being, after I moved up to Whitesboro, there was a story written in the Sherman Herald Democrat. There was a fantastic outdoor writer there who was in his late 70s, early 80s, even back then. And he was telling the tale of a guy that was setting jug lines with green sunfish, live green sunfish for bait to catch blue cat. Lake Texoma's got some gigantic blue cat. I mean, there was a 120-pound blue cat caught there a couple of decades ago that was put on display at the Texas Freshwater Fisheries Center. Well, when these guys do these jug lines, what they typically do is take milk jugs and jack them full of foam, and then set 3 or 4 hooks at different levels, and they go out and they run they anchor them to the bottom that have the different hooks suspended at different depths. So this guy was out blue cat fishing, and he caught a cormorant on one of his hooks. When he pulled it in, that cormorant was caught 45 feet deep in Lake Texoma. That bird had dove 35 feet deep, or 45 feet deep, and eaten the bait on that line. Hello, John Harson. Just call me Blister. I show up. Well, you know what? That's what happens when you have a friction fire. I show up late. Okay, let's see here. Hello, Blister. Jason Dodd, positive and negatives to having all 3, northern strain bluegill, copper-nosed bluegill, and redder sunfish in the pond together. I don't know any negatives to that. The northern strain bluegill, copper-nosed bluegill. Okay, so when you have northern strain bluegills, which there's actually a greater variety of genetic strains of bluegill, but just calling it northern, must be getting time to quit. Northern, so what I like, here's the upside, the positives to having northern strain bluegill and copper-nosed bluegill. The best of the best are going to survive the rest. So if you've got the habitat, the climate, the food chain to support both of those strains, or even if it's more than one, I'm a big fan of using species and strains that are native, like Jason Dodd. He's getting bluegill from Hartley Fish Farms. Those guys have been raising that strain of bluegill for decades, and they thrive in Kansas and northern Oklahoma. You know, copper-nosed bluegill are native to the southeast, but they've been transplanted throughout the south, southwest, and they work really good. Red-ear sunfish fill a totally different niche. They feed differently. They live in a different niche in the water. Red-ear sunfish, shellcrackers, they like to eat crustaceans. They have a tendency to migrate into aquatic plants. That's where they thrive the best. Where bluegill they're mostly predator fish limited by mouth size. Whether the strain thrives in that environment or not, it's going to be more about climate and habitat than anything else. Jeremy, they have dove fields that drain into the pond. Any type of crop I should avoid? Corn mound? No, I wouldn't avoid any of those crops at all. What I would do is I'd leave a buffer zone, 30 to 50 feet wide around your pond where you let it grow up in native grasses. Now, Jeremy, I've been to your place, so I know what's going on. You're going to want areas around your pond where you can access it. But up there where I know where you're talking about because I've been there with you, I would leave a wide buffer zone to allow native plants to grow, and I would encourage wildflowers, native grasses, blue stem, some of the different preferred natives as a buffer, whereas when it does rain and water flows off those dove fields, then it's going to have to flow through that buffer zone before it gets to the pond. Ian, you're welcome. Tell you what, doing this show helps keep me on my... Hey, Gil Cannonberg, good to talk to you on the phone yesterday, pal. I was hoping you'd check in. All right, Mark Dyer, cyanobacteria is caused when phosphorus levels increase. To cause a nitrogen and phosphorus imbalance, it's typically an increase in nitrogen that causes an imbalance with phosphorus. And that's typically what triggers an HAB. A little bit worried about the fertilizer, Jeremy. Don't over-fertilize. Oh, there's Peyton. Hello, Peyton. Let me see what you got. Whew. I don't know where that's coming from. Talking on nitrogen excess from yard fertilization. Obviously, fertilize usually with... Oop, it spun out. With phosphorus to create plankton blooms when clarity and water temps call for it. This lake being surrounded by high-end homes that fertilize yards every year. How do you find the balance to keep from creating filamentous algae blooms for excess nutrients? Or how do you time it? I doubt the owners would be willing to stop fertilizing. Yeah, okay, so I know what you're saying. So what you're saying is, how do you balance the lawn fertilizers to the fertility levels in a pond to decrease the risk of having filamentous algae blooms? Well, here's the catch-22 with that. Filamentous algae starts trying to bloom by about when the temperature's in the low 50s. Well, you're not going to fertilize to try to grow a plankton bloom in the low 50s. You're going to wait till the water temperature gets up in the upper 50s, low 60s. So one of the things you can do is you can go ahead and do some water chemistry tests and check the nitrates and nitrites compared to the phosphates and see those ratios. And if you know what you're looking for, you can see that. But better yet, on the ground, when you start seeing that filamentous algae grow, start knocking it out as soon as you see it. And then if you can keep it at bay, like what some guys will do, like this time of year, is they'll add a pond dye. I'm not a great big fan of pond dyes except right now. because I want those pond dyes to be dissipated for fishing ponds about the time that the pond gets warm enough that it can start growing a plankton bloom. So I think the best answer is when you start to see that filamentous algae grow, knock it out. Once the temperature gets up into the 60s and you can fertilize, fertilize. If you want to use a pond dye, now's the time. That way it can be dissipated in around Shreveport, Louisiana, where Peyton lives, by about the time it's time to fertilize. And then also think about using tilapia. Now, I would not use tilapia in Baton Rouge, but I'd use tilapia in Shreveport. All right, boys, I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. Make sure I got everybody covered. Gil, great to talk to you, buddy. I'm so glad you're watching. Eric, you're welcome. Jim, you're welcome. Jeremy. Okay, so guys, I'm going to wrap it up. We've been going a little over an hour. And as always, I do appreciate you guys checking in and watching this show. It keeps me going. It really does. And I love sharing this stuff with you guys. I mean, I've learned all this stuff. You guys are interested to hear it. I'm interested to share it. So I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing next Tuesday, but I got a feeling it's going to be hanging out with you guys. So until next Tuesday, adios for now.